how to handle and deal with long distance relationships. I was in a long distance relationship for about 1 year, and at the time when I began the relationship, I was actually moving to another country. So in hindsight, it was probably not the best move of mine to get involved in a long distance relationship, because with that particular person who I'd started a long distance relationship with at the time, I'd only just started seeing her on a more serious basis. We'd only really just become an item when I left the country. I think at the start we're going to see how it goes, because we were just in that honeymoon stage of the relationship. So I guess we were in love, but it was the early stages of the relationship. So we decided we'll play it cool for now. After about 2 or 3 months, it was getting a lot more serious, and she wanted to know what I was planning to do with the relationship, and I said, well, I'd like to continue it, even though I'm going to be gone for a year, but I want to continue this afterwards. And she went along with it, and even though I missed her terribly, and I loved her very much, and I had an end in mind, and I had a goal after that particular year. Unfortunately, towards the end of the year, the relationship fell apart. So I can't say I've had a successful long distance relationship. However, out of that relationship, I've learnt a lot of things. And I'd like to share with you some strategies and tips that you can use to handle and cope with being in a relationship that is more virtual rather than physical. I was asked on Quora to answer a particular question about long distance relationships, and I'll link that article in the description. And what I'm about to tell you is basically what I wrote in the article, but I'll go a little bit deeper into what I wrote. But long distance relationships, I believe, require two main things. Of course, there's a whole lot of other strategies that you can use, and they apply to any relationship really, but I believe the two main things you must have are, one, an end goal in mind, and two, you need to set boundaries. So let's flesh those ideas out a little. Number one is to have an end goal in mind. You know, what do you expect out of the relationship? What do you want out of the relationship? What's going to happen at the end? Are you going to be together at the end? Is one person going to move to the other person's location, or vice versa? If you don't have a particular target or an end destination for that long distance part of the relationship, then that can lead to, well, a lot of negativity in the form of arguments, misunderstandings, regrets, etc. So it's important to have something that you're both working towards, as it is in any relationship, but more so when you're not actually physically together. Number two is to set boundaries. Know what's acceptable and not acceptable. I've learned this the hard way. Because I did certain things that I thought were quite innocuous, but my ex-girlfriend, my girlfriend at the time, thought was a huge red flag, and started a minor thunderstorm in a teacup. That's how I saw it anyway. But that happened because, well, we never talked about what we would consider reasonable behavior on both sides. But I think after that, once we sat down, once we talked about it over the phone, of course, because it's long distance, once we got some clear perspective about how I saw it, how I saw the behavior, and how she saw the behavior, we got to work on what we would consider a good point and a bad point. What was crossing the line and what was not going to ruffle any feathers. That definitely made things a lot smoother. Well, until the end, of course. But if you don't have those boundaries set, then, well, there's a potential there for the relationship to blow up in your face. And if you really love that person, then you definitely don't want that to happen. So, sit down with the person, preferably before you start the relationship, the long distance portion of the relationship anyway. And find out what they want. Find out what you want. I'll end the video with this point. Long distance relationships are quite hard. It's one of the hardest relationships I've had to be in, because I've happened to be in, I should say, not had to. I've happened to be in. Because you're hardly ever going to see that person. You'll communicate, you'll talk a lot, you'll text a lot, but you'll never be physically with that person. Now, the questions you need to ask yourself are, can you handle that? Can you cope without being to touch or see that person in the flesh? Can you handle being physically apart for long periods of time? We're talking weeks, more like months, sometimes years. I've known of people who've done long distance relationships for years and have survived. Are you strong enough to handle that? If you aren't, I highly suggest you don't get into this particular type of relationship. It can only end badly for you. You do not want to go into a long distance relationship half-assed. Now, that's not to bash long distance relationships. They can actually be periods of personal growth. You can find out who you are, deepen your connection with that other person. Long distance is possible, but it requires work. So just keep in mind that, like any relationship, it requires work, but even more so because you're separated by oceans and distance. If you are in a long distance relationship, then stick it out. Keep going. Keep the communication going. Be strong. And remember that one day you'll be together again. If you have any further questions or need some more advice, if you're in a long distance relationship or you need some clearer direction, please reach out and get in touch with me. I'll be more than happy to answer any of your queries. Until then, stay safe, be strong, and I'll see you whenever I see you.